He called the police after finding out someone was living in his apartment, but their response was shocking. A man decided to move into a small apartment in the city. The apartment looked great, but it didn't take him long to realize that something was wrong. Every morning when he woke up, he'd notice that some food was missing from the fridge. He'd also find utensils and mugs missing from the cupboard. It wasn't a lot, but enough to make him wonder who was taking them. At first, he thought maybe he was just being forgetful, or that it was stress from moving. However, one day he noticed that a packet of sugar was missing from the kitchen. He knew that he hadn't bought any sugar, but then again, he'd also never taken any sugar from the packet before. This made him suspicious, so he started looking around the apartment for signs of a break-in. But everything seemed to be in order. The locks were all intact, and there were no signs of forced entry. Still, he couldn't help but feel like someone was living in his apartment with him. As the days went by, more and more things started disappearing. One night he heard noises coming from the kitchen. He rushed to the door and found that it was locked from the inside. He tried calling the landlord, but his calls went straight to voicemail. He was furious because he had no one to turn to for help. He felt helpless, and as the days went by, more and more things started disappearing. He found food missing from the fridge, and even some of his clothes were gone. It was clear that someone was living in his apartment. He didn't know what to do until one day he came up with a plan. One day, he decided to install a hidden camera in his apartment to see what was going on. He put the camera in a spot where it wouldn't be seen, but would still capture everything that happened in the kitchen. Then he left the apartment and waited for the next day. When he came back, he brought a recorder to listen to the footage. He felt nervous as he played the tape, but soon his fear turned to shock. The tape showed that someone had been staying in his apartment while he was away. The only problem was that they weren't just staying there, they were living there. The intruder had made a nest in the corner of the kitchen and had been eating his food and wearing his clothes. They were clearly homeless and had nowhere else to go. But that wasn't the worst part. The man was shocked to see how long the intruder had been there. The camera had been recording for weeks, but the intruder had been there for at least 2 months. They had been living in his apartment without him knowing it. He felt a mix of emotions at that moment. He was angry that the intruder had been living in his apartment and stealing his food, but he also felt bad for them. The person was clearly desperate and had nowhere else to go. Still, he couldn't let them stay there any longer. As soon as he finished watching the tape, he went to the kitchen and started packing the person's things. He took out the dirty clothes and the food they had been eating and threw it in the garbage. He didn't want to be rude, but he also didn't want the person to come back. Then he went to the window and unlocked it. He wanted to make sure the person could leave if they wanted to. Finally, he went back to the kitchen and waited. It didn't take long for the person to come out of their hiding place. They looked skinny and dirty, and he could tell that they hadn't eaten in a while. The person looked at him and asked for food, but he just shook his head and pointed to the door. He didn't want to argue. He just wanted the person to leave. The person hesitated for a moment, then slowly started to walk towards the door. As they passed him, he could see that they were crying. He felt bad, but he had to do what he had to do. He couldn't let them stay in his apartment any longer. Once outside, the person looked at him and thanked him for letting them use his apartment. Then they turned and walked away. He watched them go and couldn't help but feel bad. Still, he had no choice but to let them go. He couldn't risk having a homeless person living in his apartment. After the person was gone, he went back inside and locked the door. He was relieved that the situation was finally over. But that's when he saw it. The ceiling was caved in and there was a hole in the floor. He had seen the person crawling through the hole, but he had just assumed that it was a ventilation shaft. Now he was starting to think that it might be something else. He looked around the room and noticed that the baseboard was loose. He pried it off the wall and found a ladder. He put the ladder against the wall and climbed up into the ceiling. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The ceiling was actually a false ceiling, and behind it was a secret room. The room was small and cramped, and there was a mattress on the floor. The person had been living in the ceiling the whole time. He couldn't believe that he had been living in the same apartment as a homeless person and not known it. He started to explore the rest of the apartment and found more clues that the person had been living there. There was a pile of clothes in the closet and a toothbrush under the sink. He was disgusted to realize that the person had been using his bathroom. He called the police and told them about the situation. They arrived quickly and started to search the apartment. They found the secret room and the evidence that the person had been living there for weeks. They also found out that the person had been there for much longer than he had thought. The police had actually been looking for the person because they were wanted for burglary. They had broken into several apartments in the building and had been living in the walls or the ceilings. The man was shocked to learn that the person had been a criminal, but he was also relieved that they were finally caught. He didn't want to live in an apartment where a criminal had been living, so he decided to move out. The police offered to let him stay in a hotel until he could find another apartment, but he declined. He wanted to get away from that apartment and as soon as possible. He found a new apartment quickly and moved in, but he couldn't help but wonder what would have happened if he hadn't found the hidden camera. Would the person have stayed in his apartment forever, or would they have eventually been caught? He never found out, but he was grateful that he had been careful and installed the hidden camera. It had saved him from a lot of trouble. If you like this story, please subscribe to my channel and give me 5 stars. Thanks for watching.